You. Hi there. Christopher.
Donniel.
Sorry.
Donniel. Donniel.
Nice to meet you.
It's ready to start.
Oh, it's only
Am I speaking up there?
here's better for the
Wherever you tell me, I'm good.
stand or sit.
Stand.
This or no?
What?
This or no?
Perfect.
Any sheets or anything or no?
Yeah, the ones I have right there.
But not for anybody. Great.
I thought that I'm getting it for you don't need it. It doesn't. Not for tonight.
So for the Q&A, it's not me, it's just them. So I'll hand the microphone around to people.
Perfect. However you want, whatever you want me to do. I should speak for like 40 minutes.
Yeah. Great.
And
We have
do
time
something,
tonight.
and then let them talk.
Just do a couple thank yous. You tell me when we're streaming.
All good, right? Yes, sir.
Christopher runs the show.
Let me get it.
Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. It's beautiful to have a full house here in Cone Chapel. We are honored to welcome you to the Abner and Roz Goldstine Scholar in Residence. Where's Roz and Abner? There we go, everybody. Roz and Abner. Good to have Ethan as well, with your family as well. Thank you for coming. Just a couple of thank yous before we get started. First, where's Leslie Wachtel? Leslie Wachtel, who really spearheads our committee for our Scholar in Residence program each and every year and brings top scholars from around the world to Sinai Temple. And to Rebecca Small, who works so closely with Abner and Roz, who really just brings a high level of what we do here at Sinai Temple. We're going to introduce our scholar, which really needs no introduction, but it's important to those of you who are here and also those of you who are watching at home. Rabbi Dr. Donniel Hartman, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, holds the Kaufman Family Chair in Jewish Philosophy, the author of the highly regarded 2016 book, Putting God Second, How to Save Religion from Itself, and the host of the award-winning For Heaven's Sake, one of the most popular Jewish podcasts in North America, #1 on my list as well. Rabbi Hartman is the founder of some of the most extensive education, training, enrichment programs for scholars, educators, rabbis, religious and lay leaders in Israel and North America, a prominent essayist, blogger, and lecturer on issues of Israeli politics, policy, Judaism, and Jewish community. He has a PhD in Jewish philosophy from Hebrew University, an MA in political philosophy from New York University, and MA in religion from Temple University, and rabbinic ordination from the Shalom Hartman Institute. The author of The Boundaries of Judaism, co-author of Spheres of Jewish Identity, co-editor of Judaism and the Challenges of Modern Life. His newest book, which will be unveiled here on Sunday, which we hope you come back for, Who Are Jews and Who Can We Become?, published in November 2023. Married to Adina, father of 3 children and 5 grandchildren, and most importantly tonight, our Abner and Roz Goldstine Scholar in Residence. Let's give a warm Shabbat welcome to Rabbi Donniel Hartman.
Really don't want anybody to stand. So come. There's some seats here and there. Come. Good. Are you okay? Good. Okay. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I apologize, but I think I'm going to hurt myself if I keep on turning backwards, so.
We're used to this.
You're used to this here, good. Okay. This. Make myself comfortable. Good. Could you hear me? Good. As a people, post-Holocaust, we're used to people feeling sorry for us. We've gotten used to sympathy. A lot of Jews, there's a lot of people in the world who love dying Jews. When we die, we have a lot of friends. As a Zionist, I despise that sympathy. I don't want it. I'm not interested in it. Zionism is not about loving Jews because we died. Zionism is not embracing Israel because of the Holocaust. Zionism is about my right to be a free people in my land. Just like other people have that right, I have that right. And as a result, an integral part of Zionism is the embrace of power. You can't be connected to Israel unless you're willing for Jews to embrace power. You can't script these things. You can't. Israel is about the Jewish people saying, I know I'm not completely independent. Nobody's completely independent. But I'm going to take responsibility for my life. I don't want you to go to Yad Vashem, my father used to say. Can you embrace me and accept me with my success, with my power, and with my might? And it's there that many people struggle. Jews of power is complicated. And I want to talk tonight about power. Because as Jews, we have to understand how we understand power. How do we think about it? Or how can we think about it? There's some people here who know me for many years, and they've heard me say this before. I remember as I came to Israel as a 13-year-old, I was 4'10", and I weighed 45 pounds. By the time I went into the army, I was close to 6 feet, but I weighed 105 pounds. I heard that there was such a thing as a muscle, but I had yet to have a clear idea where a muscle was. I know this is dating myself. I used to love watching the pictures of someone called Atlas. Some of you don't have a clue, but I said like, oh, wow. I had no idea what that meant. And in the Army's infinite wisdom, before I became a tank commander, they made me the loader in the tank. And in battle, you live and die on whether you have shells in your gun. Because everything could work fantastically. But if there's no shell in the gun, it's, as we say, it's not going to be good for the Jews. And I was in the Sinai Desert. And you have to learn how to load shells quickly. And they were 50, 60 pounds. Wasn't going to happen. It's not, I meant well, but like, what was I supposed to do? Big things. How was I going to load them? And my poor commander, he didn't get to sleep. Because when everybody else stopped training, he said, Donniel, come. And day after day, muscles I didn't develop, but I developed a technique. Sometimes you see, it's like mothers with babies. I started to use my hips. It was like, I got a way to lift it up enough with my hip, and I got really good at it. But I remember physically on my body right now. The dignity that I felt when I was able to load a gun. The dignity that I felt that I was going to protect my people. That I was part of the new Jews. I wasn't going to die. I was going to claim my right to be by training, by sweat, by struggling. And we would be if we were part of a people who shared that responsibility. I am a center-left, politically leaning liberal Jew who carries a gun in Jerusalem. I don't do victimhood. Not interested. Just not interested. I want to know that if somebody's going to possibly hurt my children, my family, I'm going to be there and do my best. And for me, that is the essential, not the duty, but that is the essential gift of Zionism. That I can do that. But that sounds nationalistic, warmongering. How do we make sense of this? Because Israel is one of the few countries in the world which is not a superpower. See, superpowers get to use power however they want and to declare that what they are doing is just because they have a veto in the United Nations. And no one could say you're wrong. I don't only have a right as a superpower, I have a right to declare what I'm doing is right. In Israel, we need to use power in order to survive. And as Jews who are called to defend Israel, how do we talk about power? Is power, and there are those who are beginning to believe that power is essentially immoral. You're morally flawed. Couldn't you please embrace victimhood again? I liked you so much that way. Now, we Jews also like it. We love being David. The only problem is that once David defeated Goliath, guess who David is? Goliath. You can't be David and Goliath at the same time. Or in more modern terms, Israel cannot be startup nation and pathetic nation at the same time. So how do we think about power? So at the beginning of my remarks, I want to briefly outline how I believe our tradition frames the way we think about this, or can think about it. And then I want to reflect on what are the implications this has for the war in Gaza. Because there's something insane about a world that embraces our right to fight after 1,200 of our citizens are slaughtered. But somehow the minute 1,200 Gazans are killed, including Hamas, then our right to fight is over. It's not proportionate anymore. So how do we talk? Now, my remarks tonight are not meant as a defense for Israel towards those who are attacking us. Same thing that you learn in Israel, defense starts with ourselves. How do you understand it? Do you feel comfortable with it? What's your relationship to a powerful Israel? And how do you think about power, but also power's limits? The story of power and Jews begins in the beginning of the Bible, when God creates humankind. And God says, let us make human beings in our image after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. Now, I read this verse not just once a year. Judaism is my profession. It's like my business. So I'm reading this over and over and over again. And it was only about 10 years ago that I realized something strange is happening here. God is the God who creates the world with speech, remarkable power, could do anything that God wants. And God says, let us make human beings in our image and in our likeness. And I used to believe that in our image and our likeness was God gave us a mind, God gave us a moral conscience, but that's not what Genesis says. What does it mean to be created in the image of God according to Genesis? They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. To be created in the image of God is to be endowed with power. That is the definition of the human race and the telos, the purpose of our existence. By the way, it is here that the idea of tikkun olam is first introduced. It's not mentioned. The word tikkun olam doesn't exist. But here, that idea, you're supposed to rule the world and master it. To be a human being is to embrace the capacity to change the world. If you're uncomfortable with power, you're uncomfortable with the essential aspect of the human condition. When you use power, you are giving expression to your humanity and to your purpose in the world. But it's very interesting. In Genesis, who are we supposed to use our power over? And who are we not supposed to use it over? In Genesis, we're supposed to rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, all the creeping things that creep on earth. But who are we not supposed to use our power over? Human beings. Come, sweetheart. God doesn't give us power to rule over other human beings. All human beings are created in the image of God. How we're supposed to relate to each other, in Genesis 1, God doesn't say. And that was just probably number 3 of God's mistakes. And in the Bible, they speak about God's mistakes all the time. When we leave the Garden of Eden, what's the first thing that happens? No, that's in the garden. I'm doing a PG version tonight, so I'm skipping the Garden of Eden. Cain kills Abel. The minute we leave the garden, and the garden is part of another story, the first thing we do when we're in the world, when we were in God's garden, we didn't even need power. In the Garden of Eden, human beings do not have power. Who has power? God. God plants everything. God takes care of everything. God just wants us to listen to God, and then we get the gift of God's power. But we choose not to live in God's world. We don't want to live in a world where God is the one with power. We want power. And the minute we leave the garden, the first thing that a human being does is we kill another human being. And as the story progresses, the world is ultimately filled with violence. That gift of power that we are given to rule the world, we choose to use it to rule other human beings. And God then says, I have to destroy this world and start all over again. This world where human beings are abusing their power and they want to use their power to control other people, that's not the power that I intended to give to you. And then after the destruction of the world, God then changes and gives instruction to us on how we're supposed to use that power. In Genesis 1, God assumed we were going to do it right. Why? Because we were created in the image of God. And God said, if I know, you know. Yeah, I don't have to tell you what to do. I just created you in my image. In Genesis 9, God now gives instructions. The instruction is simple. But for your own lifeblood in Genesis 9, I will require a reckoning. I will require it of every beast, of every human being too, will I require a reckoning for human life. Of every human being for that of their fellow humans. And listen carefully. For whoever sheds the blood of human beings, by human beings shall their blood be shed. For in God's image did God make humankind. In Genesis 1, to be created in the image of God is to have power. In Genesis 9, to be created in the image of God is to have inherent value to your life. To be created in the image of God means that every human life is sacred. Every human life. But something really interesting happens. God says, whoever kills another human being, what's supposed to happen? They shall be killed. Now, why do I kill people if every human being is created in the image of God? Why do I have in the Bible this death penalty? What am I doing? What is the meaning of this verse? Whoever sheds the blood of human beings, by human beings shall their blood be shed, for in God's image did God make humankind. Why, according to the Bible, should we kill those who kill? There is one possibility, and in theories of punishment and philosophy. Are we all good? This is, in my first talk today, there was an earthquake. Just for the record, I feel safer in Israel. I feel better in the dark when I have my gun. All good? For now. There's one theory. It's called the retributive theory of punishment. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If you kill, you deserve to be punished. But in the context of Genesis 9, it doesn't make sense. I read Genesis 9 as a utilitarian theory of punishment, which then is going to give birth to something very, very important. Human life is sacred, and it is legitimate to take another human life if the goal is to save human life. All human life is of value, and then in order to protect human life, sometimes, as Ecclesiastes says, there is a time for war and a time for peace. A time to kill and a time to heal. Using power in self-defense is an expression of the idea that all human beings are created in the image of God. Because if all human beings are created in the image of God, who else is created in the image of God? Me. As a liberal Jew, I am committed to the equality of humankind. I believe that all human beings are endowed with inalienable rights. And that includes me. I believe you have a right to dignity, to safety, to security. And that includes me. And our tradition introduces this notion and says to human beings, use your power. Don't use your power to control other human beings, but if you end up in that moment, you can use your power in order to create an environment in which human life will not be cheap. Because human life cannot be cheap. Because all of us are created in the image of God. Ultimately, this gives birth to what's known as just war theory. Now, some people say there is no such thing as just war theory. Some people say we live in a Hobbesian jungle of war of all against all, and all you need to do is survive. You have one right, and that is the right to do whatever you want in order to live, no matter what the consequences are. Just war theory is built on the principle of the sanctity of human life. And it is a theory which says that it is legitimate to go to war when it is a war of self-defense. And only as a war of self-defense. In the context of war, there is a time where war can be an expression of your liberal commitments. It's not a suspension of your liberal commitments, it's an expression of it. Now here, just try to let that enter your soul, because so many of us buy into what I believe is a distorted ethic, in which somehow war is always corrupt but necessary. The ideal form of existence is some form of pacifism. The Bible says, no. I gave you power. Don't you dare take another life. But if your life is endangered, then acting that way is an expression of your commitment to your liberal values. Now, we as Jews need to begin to speak about war as a liberal agenda, because when we don't, we give into somebody else's moral categories. And then by definition, when somebody attacks us and we defend ourselves, by definition, we're morally flawed. By definition, oh, can't you just be Canada? And I lived in Canada for many years. Are there any Canadians here? As you and I know, Canadians are nice. People, they're nice. They're just nice. Can't you just be nice? Oh, Israelis, can't you just be nice? Can't you just get along? And somehow the mere act of war is already a moral failure. While we cannot convince our enemies that it is not the case, we ourselves have to know. But if war, and now we're moving to the next stage, if war is an expression of your liberal values, self-defense cannot be your only liberal value. If all human beings are created in the image of God and I go to war because I'm created in the image of God, then even when you go to war, you have to ask yourself, what are your moral responsibilities? What are my moral responsibilities towards civilians? What are my moral responsibilities in how I use my power? I have an immense power that's not meant to be used in war. It's meant to be used to build a flourishing and beautiful society. I am forced to go to war. But how do you not forget, in the midst of war, your moral responsibilities to those who you're fighting, to your enemy? The code of ethic of the Israeli military states that you're only allowed to use your power and your weapons in self-defense. There is no general in the Israeli army who can order an Israeli soldier to use their weapon not in self-defense. Code of ethic in every soldier's pocket. They are trained. You're allowed to use it only in self-defense. And in the military code of ethic, it explicitly states that we as an army believe that all human beings are created in the image of God and have inherent value, irregardless of their national, religious, and gender identities. That means when I go to war, I am not fighting animals. When I go to war, I'm fighting human beings. You're only allowed to use your weapons in self-defense. You're only allowed to use your force in proportion to the danger you face. Now, let me clarify what proportionality means, because there's a tremendous amount of confusion around the principle of proportionality. There are some who believe, mistakenly, that the moral principle in international law of proportionality means that if they kill 1,200 of you, you get to kill 1,200 of them, and then you have to stop. The principle of proportionality is to put into a calculus what are the purposes of what you're trying to achieve, and what are the potential civilian casualties that could result, and does the mission justify those casualties? So I'll give you an example. If Yahya Sinwar is now, we find out that he's in a bunker, or we know he's in a bunker, but we find out which bunker. And he happens to be right now with 5 children and 2 cousins and an uncle. Are we allowed to bomb knowing fully well that the children and the uncle and the cousins are innocents? Under morality of war, that is considered a legitimate just act, because killing Sinwar can have a larger effect on the outcome of the war, and as a result, the civilian casualties are proportionate to the goal and aim that you want to achieve. If the lieutenant or the sergeant of a platoon of the 3rd Division in the 3rd Division of Hamas in northern Gaza is with his 2 children, his wife, his uncle, and his cousin, killing him and the civilians the innocent civilians, is disproportionate. Because the impact of killing a sergeant or a lieutenant, the impact of that is nominal. And so in each case, you have to ask yourself, this is Israeli military code. You have to ask yourself, you can use your weapons only in self-defense, And in the process of engaging in a war, we explicitly state you have to do everything in your power to avoid civilian casualties, which Israeli military understands as including endangering lives of our soldiers. And we could only set aside the distinction between combatant and non-combatant when the act is proportionate. It's an expression of self-defense, and the casualties are proportionate to the goals that we want to achieve. The war in Gaza is a just war. But how you fight a just war justly is a question that Israel and Jews have to ask. We cannot declare that Israel is the most moral army in the world. We cannot perceive war as an expression of our liberal values if we're not going to ask those questions. I'm not determining tonight what the answer is. And don't worry, tonight, in this conversation, we're not determining Israel's military strategy over the next week in Gaza. So you could all relax. Don't worry. Nothing that I'm going to say and nothing that you're going to think is right now going to endanger or determine which bomb we drop. But if we embrace war as a liberal value, there's serious conversations that we have to have. We need to have. And having those conversations is not an act of disloyalty to Israel. It's actually the essence of what Zionism is about. I don't embrace power as an end unto itself. I don't desire power to rule over another people. I would love if I never had to attack. I personally would love if there was a Palestinian state. And I'm not asking you to agree with me. It doesn't matter to me. I feel religiously, Jewishly obligated, if I could, to have a Palestinian state living side by side with Israel. Right now, I don't know how to achieve that. I don't see a Palestinian leadership who is capable of it. I don't see a society engaging it. I don't see how I could do that without violating my liberal values of my right to live. But it's very different when you talk that way. Because when you talk that way, see, you could talk like a Hobbesian. You could say, listen, in the Middle East, we live in a jungle. And in a jungle, if you don't know how to fight, you're going to die. That is one of the most dangerous ways to talk for the future of the state of Israel. Because what you're doing is you're suspending your moral conversation. And you're suspending your moral obligations and your moral aspirations. We could fight. We could engage in a just war. We have to constantly engage in the question of how you fight a just war justly. Now, in Israel, there are two camps. One camp is traumatized by October 7th and has no space to even talk about these issues. They have no space. They can't right now. All they could think about is, how do we win? And it's very important in moral philosophy that you take into account how human beings are feeling. A large majority of Israelis have no space to talk right now about how we fight a just war justly. It's not that they don't want to, psychologically they can't. Their kids, their husbands, their wives, their fathers are in harm's way. And they're frightened that this moral conversation might endanger them. But truthfully, it doesn't even reach that level. It's just there's no space. Right now, there's no space. There's another faction in Israel for whom the whole conversation is rejected. There's an ultra-nationalist segment of Israeli society who believes that only Jewish lives matter. And they're not engaging in the conversation because emotionally they don't have room. They're not engaging in the conversation because ideologically other lives have no room within their moral universe. First, we have to hug and slowly begin a conversation. The second, we have to engage in a cultural, ideological war over the future of what Zionism in Israel is about. Because in many ways, for these ultranationalists, it's not all human beings who are created in the image of God. It's only Jews who are created in the image of God. We as a people need to begin to think about how we fight a just war justly. Now, we're used to fighting short wars, and that makes it easy. 3 weeks, you're in a moral haze, the war's over, now you can begin to talk. This war is going to last years. Years. We have to understand that as Israelis, as I said beforehand, we chose to pretend that we're living in Scandinavia. And we allowed horrific danger. We allowed evil to take root, to plan, and to prepare for how they are going to kill us. And it's not just in Gaza. It's in Hebron, it's in Tulkarem, it's in Jenin. We don't want to deal with it. No, I understand. I really do. I was part of the same thing. I don't want to deal with it. I wanted to live in Scandinavia. You can't blame me. It's nice there. Other than the suicide rate. It's really nice in Scandinavia. And we Israelis wanted to live in Scandinavia and talk about restaurants and culture and which trip we were going to take and what business we were going to build and how successful we are. And please remember, we Israelis, up before October 7th, were the 7th happiest people in the world. It's a little meshugana. Really is. There's something wrong. But you're number 17, by the way. We actually were competing with Scandinavian countries. But we now know that we can't afford to ignore this evil. That if somebody says they want to kill you and is amassing the means to want to kill you, has the ideology which supports them and activates their desire to kill you, and is planning it. And the most difficult thing for us Jews to admit, they're as good as we are. They're as smart as we are. And if that's the case, then an October 7th is going to happen, and it could happen again. That means we have to live now with a sense of ongoing security concern, and in fact, a low-burning war for a long time. We can't afford to embrace a non-liberal theory of power and of war And if we do, the whole nature of Israel will change. The nature of your relationship with Israel will change. And Israel's standing in the world will change. And yes, we have many enemies in the world. But we also have a lot of friends. A lot of friends who want to know and who say, yes, I support Israel because you share my values. So where are those values? I'll end with a friend of mine came to me and asked, he's connected to certain parts of the Israeli government, and he asked me, I'm trying to collect suggestions on how we improve Israel's political relations in the world, Israel's standing in the world. What are the things that we could do? Do you have any ideas? So I said, yeah, I actually have a lot of ideas, but what are you thinking about? Like, what's the government planning? Like, what are their thoughts? And he said, yeah, well, one thought is that we're going to allow a European nation to set up a hospital on a boat. I said to him, putting Gazans on a boat, funded by you think that's actually going to be helping Israel's public relations? Like refugees, boats, like this, the optics of that, this seems to you to be. And then I started to get really nervous, but actually we have a real problem. He went on with similar suggestions, and I said to him, why don't we start building field hospitals? Why don't we? We have the capacity to put up a field hospital in any corner of the world in 24 hours, even if that place has no electricity, has no water. We could set up a trauma hospital quicker than any other country in the world. Forget public relations for a second. As liberals, I am going to fight the war in Gaza because I have a right to live. But shouldn't we also be talking about Gazans? Is that a relevant question? Now, again, I understand Israelis aren't there yet, but soon we're going to have to be there. There are some Israelis who never want to go there, but it's exactly against them that we have to begin to talk. I'm not talking about endangering our children. I'm talking about embracing power as a liberal value. So instead of sending incubators to Gaza, why don't we create a hospital for birthing mothers? Oh, how do you secure it? Trust me. We're going to take 20% of your security guards here, by the way, just to help us protect it. It's harder to get into the shul than it is to get into Israel. But we don't have that ability. I want to leave you with this thought. Power is a gift. Embracing that gift is what Zionism teaches the Jewish world. Relinquishing the place of victimhood in our story. Relinquishing it. Not defining ourselves that way. Not trying to find people who love me and respect me as long as I am a victim, but who could see me as an equal. But our message to the world, as distinct from the superpowers, is that we believe that power is a liberal value, not a right that I have as a superpower. Power is not an expression of living in a jungle. Power in war could sometimes be the ultimate expression of moral responsibility and sensitivity. But that means as Jews, We have to learn to talk, to think, to critique ourselves. Now here, what will people say? What are people going to say? If we start criticizing ourselves, our enemies are just going to win. I have to tell you, I've been engaged in defending Israel for over 30 years. You don't make any friends by denying what they already know. And you don't make any friends by claiming your own moral perfection. You make friends when you give expression to the fact that you share the same values, even though sometimes we might disagree, and even though sometimes we might make a mistake. Yes, we do make mistakes. But we don't deny it's a mistake, we admit it, and then go on and say we want to learn from it. In a time of war, we could shut down. We could shut down in Israel, and Jews around the world could also begin to hunker down. It's precisely at this moment that we have to, for ourselves, embrace the fact that we are a people who believe that all human beings are created in the image of God. And it is precisely because of that that power is an expression of our morality. But how we use that power is a challenge that our morality and our Jewish values places before us. And how we combine those two, how we fight a just war justly, how we claim our right to be, but also insist on being a holy people, on being a light. Welcome to Israel of 2024. Thank you.
So we're going to take 3 questions. I know it's not enough time for everybody, but Rabbi Hartman will be here all Shabbat. I just want to say one thing about security, actually, a story. One of our guards, Oded, from Yerushalayim, on October 7th, came to us and said he's leaving back to Yerushalayim, and he had no security vest to take with him. And Mike Delaportis, our head of security, who is not Jewish, took his vest off of him, put it on Oded, and he went back to Israel. So it's an amazing togetherness. Yes, for Oded, please. So we want to, the floor is yours. Always hard to be the first. Don, I'm going to give you the microphone. We're going to ask for questions, not comments today.
Probably the worst question anybody's going to ask. If the ultimate resolve is the destruction of Sinwar, and I were a hostage, I would be willing to say, take me along with him. I would believe that one of the considerations of the hostages is that point of view that they might have, and whether Israel is brave enough to take that position.
The question was, in essence, what do we do if, in order to kill Sinwar, it's not about his children, it's about Israeli hostages who are sitting up, who are collected around him as a human shield. No one in Israel knows what to do. It's one of those things that many Israelis think about, but they refuse to give an answer. And I'm not saying you're wrong. The last podcast, I think, that I just came out yesterday is talking about this struggle. We don't know what to do. In theory, there's one answer. But when it's your family, and we all feel they're our family, and we don't know how to do this as a rational choice. So what did we do? For the last 100 and something days, we said there's no conflict. We said killing Hamas, fighting Hamas, and freeing the hostages are mutually conducive, are mutually supporting each other. But we're coming to a moment where it's not that. And it might be Sinwar, and it might be a hostage deal in which we have to release people, too many. Or do we have a ceasefire? You want to understand Israelis right now? The vast majority of them refuse to answer that question. And if their forced push comes to shove, they'll go with freeing the hostages. We just can't turn our back on our people. We just can't. And as I say in the podcast, I know it's a source of weakness, but that weakness is also our greatest strength. We're part of a people who, they might be able to choose to die. I don't know if I could choose for them to die. But I'm not arguing with you. I appreciate the depth of the question. There's no answer. There's truly, truly no answer. And part of the pain in Israel is that we know that that question is going to be answered, and that some of those answers are going to be forced upon us, even though they're profoundly unacceptable. And it's that's the legacy of October 7, and we live with it. I hope it's not an answer. It's just a feeling. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. You mentioned nationalism and liberalism. What role do you feel that the dissent in Israel played in allowing for Hamas to prepare the way they prepared and to attack the way they attacked? And if you feel it had a role, how do you see a conversation starting while balancing the safety of Israel at the same time?
We all tell stories. And we tell stories that reaffirm, very often, a worldview that we feel is essential. And there are two stories that are told from this last year, or a few. One is that the government, by putting through an attempt at judicial reform, planted seeds of divisiveness which emboldened Hamas. Story A. Story B. The response to the government's initiative at judicial reform, in which soldiers began to say, we're not going to serve, even though that never happened, but that's a whole other issue. The divisiveness promulgated by the anti-reform forces gave expression to a weakness that emboldened Hamas. Right? Who's right? Rashomon, right? Everybody tells the story. Depends where you're coming from. Personally, I have no patience for them. I have no patience for political, not that you're doing it. I want to be clear. I don't know you personally, and I didn't sense from you. I really appreciate the question as an opportunity to explain something that is out there. I feel that utilizing death and tragedy as a vehicle for gaining political points is pasnished. It's just inappropriate. And if you don't know what pasnisht is, that's my homework for you for tonight. Yiddish started from German, yeah. German got everything from Yiddish. Well, they got, it's just pasnisht. But, and we do it all the time. Every time there's a terrorist act, depending on who's in power, the opposition says it was because of you. And the same terrorist act. It's because of the settlements, it's because of your weakness. Everybody is saying knows exactly. Do you know why Hamas killed people on October 7th? Because they're evil. No, that's why they did it. And guess when they started planning it? In 2008. Nothing to do with you. We know that. We all know it. In 2008, they have been planning because they actually, unlike Israel, have an outstanding strategy on how to defeat Israel. They know that they can't defeat Israel with tanks. They know that they can't defeat Israel with conventional weapons. If we survived the Yom Kippur War, there is no conventional army powerful enough now to defeat Israel in a conventional war. And they're brilliant, and they're skilled, and they're thoughtful. And they said, what could be another way? We're going to give up conventional forces, and we're going to start concentrating on missiles. And B, we're going to try to use missiles, and if we can, and that's why they were digging tunnels into Israel. What we really want is we want to inflict on Israel a tragedy that will force them to come into our space. And we have been spending billions of dollars preparing for one thing, for Israel making the mistake of coming into my space. That's their plan. Nothing to do with judicial reform. And why did it happen now? It's actually pretty simple. Because the United States and Israel, the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, were on the verge of creating a Sunni coalition in which the Jews are part of the Sunnis. We're Sunnis in the Middle East. And it's like, what are you, 7 million of us? We're Sunnis. That's the idea. We're part of a Sunni coalition against the Shiite coalition. And Saudi Arabia and Israel were about to sign a deal. A deal that October 7th successfully stopped. Again, nothing to do with judicial reform. We have to start, and for all of us, we have to realize we have a very sophisticated, calculated enemy, who it is almost impossible for a conventional army to defeat. And so, that Wall Street Journal is now an anti-Israeli newspaper. You know why? Not for the reasons you think. Their editorials are fine. Why? Because they're the ones who are coming out with these declarations. Israel has only killed 20% or 25% of Hamas terrorists. We've only taken 25% of the tunnels. They're putting up a mirror because the Israeli press are reporting this. They're reporting what the Wall Street Journal said, and then it gave birth to a conversation. The reality is that our enemy is skilled. They have a strategy. They have an unbelievably effective tactic. And they're already planning what to do once the ceasefire comes into play. And that's part of what we're going to have to live with. And I'm going to speak about this tomorrow, we're going to have to get back to talking about judicial reform and talking about the issues that of Israeli society. And the one thing we have to know, we don't take responsibility for the evil of Hamas. We just have to take responsibility for defending ourselves. Last question.
One last question.
First off, thank you for coming to speak tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, also clap on the last question. So I just wanted to ask, so you proclaim yourself as a liberal Jew, as you said like throughout the speech, and that's fairly common, as about 7 out of every 10 Jews identify as liberal. So how do you feel about liberal politicians in America, as well as liberal leaders in higher education, showing no support for Israel or condemning of anti-Semitism?
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. There's a difference. The word is the same, but it means very different things. Again, I would tell you, I made it Aliyah when I was 13, but when I say liberal Jew, in a sense, what's an adjective and what's the noun? Tell me, I made Aliyah too early. Is Jew the noun and liberal the adjective? Okay, let's pretend that I'm right, okay? The adjective liberal, when it's connected to the noun Jew, means something different when the adjective liberal is connected to the noun politics. They're not the same. Liberal politics in America, or politics in general in America, and I apologize if I'm going to insult anybody, are an absolute dysfunctional mess. You don't even have categories. You don't know how to talk with each other. You don't know how to listen to each other. There's nothing. You're liberal, I'm conservative, and there's a shutdown. And as if it's all monolithic, I have so much trouble, I don't even want to think about American politics. Other than knowing that in my world, we need a strong America in order to create safety and sanity and decency. We need a strong America which combats China, Iran, and Russia. But other than that, I don't want to get into your politics. But I just want you to know, liberal Jew is not liberal in the sense of politics. You could be a liberal Jew and vote for a Republican. Trump might be difficult, but you can vote for a Republican. Exactly. So it's and I'm not even getting into that. I'm not getting into whether Trump is good for Israel or not. Don't worry. You're not going to get me into, I'm not going there. I could just tell you, like most Israelis, liberal Jews in Israel had different feelings towards Trump than many liberal Jews in America. We had many different feelings about it. And since we weren't worrying about American issues, we were talking about our world, we had different feelings about it. When I was using the word liberal Jew, liberal comes from the term liberties. It's not the opposite of conservative. The core of liberal politics, actually, in the United States, were more formally grounded in the Republican Party. In Israel, the true liberal party for years was the Likud. It's not your left, right, it's like you're using words and you're robbing yourselves of so much sensitivity. When I use the word liberal Jew, I mean as follows. A, I believe that all human beings are created in the image of God. B, I believe that unity is not achieved by unanimity of opinion, but by respect for diversity. 3, I believe that morality is the essence of what it means to be a Jew. And then a conflict between the moral and the ritual, moral comes first. By the way, that's the prophets. I believe that a strong Israel, that a strong Judaism is built on the respect for the inalienable rights of all human beings, and that freedom of religion for Jews and dignity and equality for all citizens of Israel are a Jewish value. I believe that peace and the pursuit of peace, as our tradition says, all of Torah was given for the sake of peace, is a value that I have to try to aspire for. As a liberal Jew, I believe that the modern world has much to teach us, and that our tradition, if it listens and learns from the modern world, it is able to transcend mediocrity and aspire to greatness. Now, every single thing that I said has nothing to do with who you vote for in America. Has nothing to do. A Republican could embrace every one of them, and a Democrat could embrace every one of them, just like in Israel. And much of my work is about creating a liberal coalition in Israel that transcends right, center, left divides. And by the way, it's achievable, and I'll talk more about that tomorrow. Now, in the United States, there is a small subsection of those who call themselves liberal politicians, liberal as distinct from conservative. There's a small subsection of the Democratic Party who are embracing, and we're looking for other words. We use words like extreme liberal, progressive liberal, because it's not standard liberal, for whom there is a subsection for whom Israel, I believe precisely because of our use of power and because we're Jews, becomes the embodiment of what's wrong in the world. Our job is to make sure that that small subsection doesn't own liberal politics in America. And one of the responsibilities that we have, and I'm not saying you're doing this either, just like when I said when it came to war, if you use the wrong language, you end up relinquishing a lot of the space that you have for nuance and sophistication. Liberal American politicians and politics are neither the enemy of liberal Judaism nor the enemy of Israel. Some have created a narrative about white power, about race, about colonialism, and place them all in one intersectional bowl in which Israel is then truly the embodiment of evil. Our job is to defend ourselves against them. And one of the most effective defenses is to have the ability to distinguish between those who are our enemies and those who are not. Those who condemn us, and it's an interesting, those who called for a ceasefire on October 7th, and those who are calling for a ceasefire on February 9th. They're not the same. I might disagree with both, but those who called for a ceasefire on October 7th basically said, Jews aren't created in the image of God. You don't have a right to exist. You are the embodiment of evil, and therefore anybody who kills you is by definition in the moral right. We have to separate them from people who are asking legitimate questions. And even if I disagree with them, the question is not illegitimate. Liberal values question the use of power, liberal Jewish values. And it all depends, what's the noun? And making that distinction, I think, will help us have more friends, talk to people, and also, by the way, learn from people. Because you don't grow as a human being when everybody says amen to you. You grow as a human being when friends talk and sometimes criticize and challenge you to think. Challenge you to think. Not to tell you what to do, but to challenge you to think about things. That's a world. In America, that's the world we live in. And we might as well embrace it. See it for what it is. We have enough problems. We don't have to transform people who aren't our enemies into our enemies. Our job is to make sure that our friends remain our friends. My friends, it was a pleasure being with you tonight. Bye,
We want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Tomorrow morning, Rabbi Hartman will be speaking for a few minutes in services, followed by our lunch. Again, a thank you to Abner and Roz for the Abner and Roz Goldstine Scholar in Residence with Rabbi Hartman. Tomorrow afternoon, if you're not here, it will be streamed on YouTube, as well as Sunday morning. Shabbat Shalom.